So let's talk about wireframes, specifically for CRO. Hi, if you don't know me, my name is Gerda and I'm a co-founder of a small CRO agency called Koalatative. And I have been doing CRO for about 7-ish years, and I wanted to talk about wireframing because it is one of the most important aspects of this work, I think, because it is the main way we communicate new test designs, test ideas to each other, to the people that we work with, and just the main way we visually communicate new solutions that we want to launch. However, I don't see a lot of people talking about how to actually do this. And I know that if you clicked on this video, you probably have some sort of relationship with wireframing already. And every CRO that I've met always has their own sort of system and favorite tools on how to do this. Like everyone has their own style. There is no right way to do this. As long as you can get your point across and your team is happy and able to understand what you're trying to communicate, I think it's all good. However, I think that there are a couple of important things to talk about here. And I wanted to also show you 5 very practical, quick and easy tricks that I've sort of picked up along the way that have been taught to me by other people as well, that have made my own life a lot more easier and that I still use on the daily basis when I do wireframes for different projects. So I'm going to go into a little bit about the philosophy of wireframes and how I think about them and what my own sort of wireframing journey has been. And then I'm going to jump into the 5 practical tips. Like I'm going to share my screen and show you how I do this on an actual project. So let's get into it. In terms of what wireframes look like, they can look like, whatever tool you're using. You can scribble something down on some actual paper with a pen, or you can have a super low fidelity type of wireframe. And these are actually real examples back from like 2020 when we started our business. And it was the first time when I needed to create a website from scratch. And as a CRO, it was a bit of a challenge because, I'd been working on a lot of different test ideas and designs, but I had never really created a completely new experience for a website from scratch with no previous design system or no sort of control to work off of. And in those types of cases, it is super helpful to at first sort of get your own raw ideas onto paper and kind of scribble them down so you can at least see where you want things to be positioned towards each other and that kind of stuff. I would never really send this type of wireframe to my designer though, because I don't think they'd be really happy about that. So the next step would be to take it into a digital tool. And this one over here is made with a tool called Balsamiq, which I actually started my wireframing journey with. It's still a really good tool, but now the practical tips that I'm going to give you later are going to be based on Figma, because Figma is now my tool of choice. And Figma just sort of came in with this, it kind of like revolutionized a lot of the workflows and processes between strategists, designers, and developers, where everyone can sort of work within the same system super easily. And it was a bit of a learning curve, but I highly recommend Figma. And actually, yeah, when we started working on our own website, it doesn't actually look a lot different than this at the moment, because our whole idea was that we wanted to have a CRO website that is under-designed and made for content specifically. And we did do a video on this whole thing, how we went about designing it and building it. And the video itself is kind of cringe because I think it was the first video that we ever posted, and we were just, learning how to be humans on camera. Still learning that, by the way, but still stand behind most of the points that we made in that video about like designing a website with user experience first and foremost, rather than flashy kind of brandy design visuals, I guess. So if you're interested, you can check that out on my YouTube channel.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago, founder of Experiment Nation. To celebrate our 5th anniversary, we are holding weekly giveaways until November 29th. Prizes include books, free consultation services, and even a t-shirt. To enter, simply join Experiment Nation Slack and fill out the entry form that can be found in the description or through the QR code on the screen. Now back to the session.
In terms of content about wireframes and what they are and how they're used and so on, there's a decent amount of stuff out there, but my thing is that they're usually written from the perspective of what I was describing earlier too, creating something from scratch. And usually this type of content is geared towards product development and product managers, trying to create really low fidelity wireframes to communicate the basic ideas before putting in any real design resource, because in that context it makes sense. You shouldn't really start designing stuff if you don't even know what type of content and elements goes into your product and so on. And you've probably heard that term thrown around a lot, low fidelity versus high fidelity. And low fidelity basically means that you're just trying to communicate like the most basic characteristics of an experience, the super minimum visual details. As we go forward into this topic, I'm going to actually argue that there are cases specifically in CRO where creating a completely new low fidelity wireframe from scratch may be more work than working within your existing elements, but I'm going to come back to that. And in terms of like what other tools you can use for wireframing, like you can Google, there's lots of them out there. Zapier has this list of 7 best wireframe tools as well. And I don't know, like I think you could use Microsoft Paint if you really wanted to, and it got your point across. I mean, your designer may not be super happy with you, but I think again, the point of wireframing is to just communicate what you're thinking for a digital solution. So whatever does the trick for you, I think is okay. And in terms of wireframing for CRO specifically, I don't see a lot of content around that. One of the few resources that I did find is this CXL article, originally published in 2016, so a number of years ago already, by Alex Burkett. And he kind of goes into a lot of the sort of mental models and framework and process that you should have for wireframing, and I think it still holds up really well too. But he kind of like makes the same case that all wireframes should be super low fidelity. The whole low fidelity thing, it's sort of perfect world scenario, and how I would describe the ideal setup for CROs within your organization would be that if you're the CRO strategist, then you do the strategy work, you do the research, you sort of create new hypotheses for testing, and then do the low fidelity wireframes to get approval for these tests and whatever. And then you would hand off that low fidelity wireframe to a very capable UX designer, who then kind of makes it into a real user experience, right? A real polished design. And if you have that set up, then consider yourself really lucky. I think it's really cool if you have those resources for, all your tests and whatever. But what is the real world CRO scenario? Oftentimes we don't have these awesome design resources for every single test that we need to launch. The other thing is that even if you do have a pretty mature experimentation program and team going, often we need to test simpler things, like let's say just copy changes or something like even just removing an element, which means you're not really designing anything new, should you really, in that case, burden your designer and hold up the test for another week while it sits in their queue? Or could you maybe use a hacky way to put together that wireframe/design yourself? So here come in the 5 super practical tips that I wanted to share with you. And I'm going to share my screen and use just my own website, Experiment Nation's website, and another random website to demonstrate these hacks to you guys. So the first trick or tip is to learn how inspect element works. And this can be super useful for just manipulating copy and simpler elements. You don't even really need to know code, but I think it helps to know how basic HTML structure regarding websites is built, just so even you can, talk to your developers in a more meaningful way. But basically what you would do is, do a right click anywhere, click inspect, and this elements console will pop up, right? And let's say you're working on Experiment Nation's website and you would like to test this header over here. So instead of, going in and creating a completely new low fidelity wireframe for this entire page or whatever, what you could simply do is find this element on your console here and quickly just change the copy to, your variation, what you want to test. Let's say drum mill is cool. We want to test that. And then it changes the visual element on the page here, not permanently, obviously, just to you. But you can just, take a screenshot of that and send that over as your wireframe. Super quick, super simple. And as I said, just maybe mess around in these div classes here. You can, just even delete things if you want to get rid of something completely and then test that. You can find different fonts and colors, what are built into the website, and kind of play around with those if you want. But yeah, super quick, super simple. Took me way too long, many years ago, to learn this. And can be useful in many different cases. Okay, tip number 2, probably the most useful one that I have ever learned and still use almost every single day when I do wireframes. Basically what it is a Figma plugin to pull in your web page with all of its individual HTML elements that you can then edit within Figma without creating anything from scratch. And let's just use a random website for the example here. I don't know, BMW. Don't have any association with them or anything, just was checking out their website and thought it would be a good example. Let's say, like a category page, for example. Lots of different, tiles and elements and pictures and filters and everything. Let's say we want to pull in this entire page. So what I would do is copy the URL and find my Figma plugins. You can just Google those or search within Figma now, I think, as well. And there's a couple of different ones. The main one that I've been using is HTML2 Design. I would just click that. And then basically you just paste in your URL, and then you can choose which resolution you want to pull in. So you have different choices between devices here. And, if you're working on a desktop test or visual, then choose a laptop icon here, or you can choose mobile as well, or you can do both. So let's try both here and see how it looks. And import. Takes a bit of time, and often some of the elements don't come through exactly as how they look on the page, but for wireframing purposes, that's totally fine. Yeah, and sometimes the fonts don't come through exactly as is too, so it wants to replace them, which is also fine. And we're done. So let's zoom in here. So basically that page also had a pop-up, which it also pulled in as a separate element. You can just lift that out of your frame here. And there you go. You have an entire page with all of its elements. And they're all editable and move aroundable. Super useful. You can edit the copy, the images, whatever you want. And the same for mobile here. You can just pull different elements apart and start your wireframing, working within your existing design elements without having to, waste time creating any of this layout or anything in your low fidelity system, so to say. Okay, so moving on to tip number 3. Don't be afraid to just use screenshots and cut stuff together to quickly communicate what you want to do. Let's say this same page, for example, where you have a category page and you need to test or implement something in between different elements, which means you need to essentially create a new white space area to place any new elements. So let's say, for example, I want to test a big fat button for something in the middle of this page. So how I would do that in a super quick way for a wireframe purpose is I would go here back to the page and take a full page screenshot. Now that I have my screenshot, I would go back to Figma and put that right in there. So just a regular screenshot over here. And now I would just make a copy of that and crop these sort of in half. So let's say this one is the top part. Like I want to put the button right between this yellow car line and this white car line. So I'll crop this one like that. And then the other one I need to crop from down here. So now I have 2 parts of that page, right? And this is where I would want to place my button. So what I would do is I would create just a new, basically white area. And find the button that I want to put here. And you can use a screenshot for that too if a button like that already exists, for example, on your website somewhere. Okay, let's say I want to test this button. I'll take a quick screenshot of that and copy paste it right here. Yeah, and that's your wireframe. Literally took like 5 seconds. Didn't need to create any low fidelity, anything from scratch. So moving on to tip number 4. And this is one of those tips that is more for creating completely, even just new pages. Like let's say you're working on a new landing page that will have a completely different layout or something, and you don't want to try to force yourself to work within these constraints of like your existing HTML elements like I showed you here, then Figma also offers a lot of different free wireframe kits. And you can just go to figma.com/wireframe tool or just Google free wireframe kits for Figma. And basically, when you go down the page, there's this Explore Kits page over here. If you click on any of them, they will just kind of open up within Figma. And usually they have a lot of good stuff, like all sorts of elements that, go with a traditional website experience, like headers and buttons, and you can always change the color of those different sort of elements, icons, layouts for different kind of stuff. Like here's an example of an entire basic page template, for example. Okay, tip number 5, last one, also a super simple one. And this one is specific for Canva and can also help you out when you need to do quick copy changes and you need to edit copy specifically on images. I was searching for a tool that would do that easily for a while, and unfortunately you can only do that in the paid Canva account, but it is super helpful. So I was working on this test where we were trying to make a video on a page more prominent because the people that watched the video had better conversion rates and the video was really good at explaining what the company does and so on. So I was trying to make it more attractive, and I wanted to take a screenshot straight from the video and then overlay that on the still sort of video player with some copy. And the screenshot itself from the video had copy in it. And we realized we needed to change it for the overlay image. And I was like, okay, my options are either to ask a designer to create this entire image from scratch, or I can find a tool that can quickly edit a single piece of copy. And Canva can actually do that. So I'm going to just take a screenshot as an example from my own website. Just a regular screenshot and put that in here. Can't edit anything on it, obviously, since it's an image, but let's say I just want to edit some of this copy here. So what I would do is go edit image, and when you're on the paid account, there's this thing called grab text. And here you can choose which bit of text you want to edit. So let's say I just want this one. Okay, click grab. And suddenly it converts it into an actual text. And the fonts may not, again, come through perfectly, but again, for wireframing or simple testing purposes, it can still be super useful. So there you go. These are my 5 super simple tips for you regarding putting together wireframes. But to wrap this presentation, little workshop up, I wanted to kind of like also go into what is the real value of wireframing skills in CRO. And I see this with a lot of people who are just starting to learn CRO, and I definitely had a huge challenge with that as well. It's one of those things where if you start to do site audits and kind of evaluate what is wrong with the website, what is bad about it, it's not that hard to notice or say that, yes, this experience is bad. It is much harder, however, to explain why it's bad and what to do about it. And that's what I see with a lot of CRO audits is people will very accurately call out the issues and the UX sort of blunders and problems, but then the next part about, okay, like how do we come up with a meaningful solution that combats that experience? And the more you learn to do these sort of wireframing exercises for different types of pages and with different methods, you start to develop this understanding of what type of solutions work for what type of problems. So I think that is the value of learning these different tricks also, and not being super stuck on one way of creating these solutions, so to say. This is it for me. This is where you can find me if you want to chat more about wireframes, anything CRO. Don't hesitate to connect with me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I hope that you found something useful from these tips. If you have your own interesting tips, reach out, share them in the comments. Thanks again for tuning in, and hope you have fun with the rest of the conference. Bye.
Hi, this is Romo Santiago, founder of Experiment Nation. To celebrate our 5th anniversary, we are holding weekly giveaways until November 29th. Prizes include books, free consultation services, and even a t-shirt. To enter, simply join Experiment Nation Slack and fill out the entry form that can be found in the description or through the QR code on the screen.